Hello， 大家好，我係計劃緊去日本嘅 Never。
好想去日本添。Hello， 大家好，我係啱啱開始返新工嘅 Frances。
Hello， 我係 Brian， 我係香港人，我係美國人。
That's so lovely.
That's so
Is that good enough?
That's lovely. Yeah,
absolutely.
我哋今集就有新嘅嘉賓，就係如果有玩 Twitter 都可能有見過呢個江松間 Brian Kern 呢個人。其實一直以嚟喺香港人群體裏面都有好多唔同背景，亦都唔同種族嘅人啦。咁亦都包括一啲以前喺香港住過嘅可能大家會覺得 expat 啦。所以今集咧，我哋就請咗 Brian Kern 嚟同我哋分享下佢對抗呢個香港經貿辦喺美國嘅一啲說好香港故事嘅 campaign， 同埋分享下佢以前點解加入咗香港嘅呢個民主運動嘅一啲經歷。So, welcome, Brian, being our first English guest today. Would you mind to explain a bit about your experience in Hong Kong? How did you get into the Hong Kong movement? We all know that you've been featured on a lot of pro-China newspaper in Hong Kong. Could you share some of your experience with us?
CIA.
I came to Hong Kong because my wife is from there. I started going to Hong Kong in 2003, and in fact, I happened to be there that summer when there was 500,000 people against the proposed Article 23 security legislation. And I was just so impressed. Wow, what is this place where you can get 500,000 people out on the streets? It wasn't until a couple of years later that we actually moved there. And when I came to Hong Kong, of course, I knew that Hong Kong was, the only place ruled by the Communist Party where you could actually commemorate June 4. And that was quite an important thing for me to do because, my students participated in that in 1989. And so I got involved in Hong Kong Alliance. That was the first sort of pro-democracy group I got involved in there. And then at the time of the umbrella movement, I was working for Occupy Central with Love and Peace, Benny Tai's movement. And I was actually doing international media liaison work. In other words, reaching out to the rest of the world and trying to spread the story about Hong Kong. And I think that was probably the first time when people in the pro-democracy movement kind of woke up and realized that we had to get better at telling our story to the rest of the world. And then, in the aftermath of the umbrella movement, it was such a chaotic time. And in many ways, it was very frustrating. There were many bickering and arguing and so on. And I just wondered, when is everything going to come together again? The answer to that was 2019 with the protests. The thing that amazed me about the protests was just how unified people were, across the political spectrum, from localists to traditional pan-Democrats. And that was just such a wonderful experience. For me, as for so many others, also the beginning of the end of my time in Hong Kong. And by 2020, right before the imposition of the national security law, my family and I decided we needed to leave. And that's when we came to the U.S. And as soon as we got here, one of the first things we wanted to know was how to get involved in Hong Kong groups here.
So recently, Brian actually got into a campaign that he started, which is the HKETO Watch campaign. Would you mind to share with us, what prompted you to start the campaign? HKETO's presence in the US?
I got interested because I didn't really know much about the Hong Kong Economic and Trade Office. I noticed that they were putting these ads on trams in different cities in Europe, like Brussels and Istanbul and Lisbon, and I think Milan, somewhere in Italy. And I turn around and I find out that the HKETO, right under my nose here, is sponsoring this Hong Kong Film Festival at the National Museum of Asian Art, which is a Smithsonian museum. And so all these big, museums in Washington, D.C. are run by Smithsonian. And I thought, wait a minute here, here's this government. It's so oppressive in Hong Kong. It's got so many of the people I worked with in prison. Its top officials like John Lee, the current chief executive, are actually sanctioned by the U.S. government. And on the other hand, here you've got this U.S. government institution working together with the HKETO to run this film festival. I thought this was actually outrageous. And it struck me, in its official pronouncements, the U.S. government has shown that it understands what's going on in Hong Kong and has been very critical of the steps that the Communist Party has taken to crack down on Hong Kong. But that doesn't necessarily mean that consciousness has filtered down to the rest of U.S. society. And so I said to myself, wherever the Hong Kong government goes out into society in the U.S. or anywhere else, it should have to confront Hong Kong people. Hong Kong people should say that government doesn't represent us. It's not an elected government. It represents the Communist Party. It's an oppressive government. It's oppressing the Hong Kong people. And so that was sort of my motivation for trying to do something to combat HKETO activities here in the U.S. And I think this has coincided with the Hong Kong government deciding that it needs HKETO and other Hong Kong government entities abroad to kind of play a stepped up role in its propaganda campaign. So right now, with the lifting of the pandemic restrictions in Hong Kong, the Hong Kong government is really, going into gear to get the message out to the rest of the world that, Hong Kong is back in business and everything is normal here and we want everyone to come back and do business. And of course, that means totally ignoring the deplorable political situation in Hong Kong. And so we Hong Kong people living abroad need to make sure that they're not allowed to do that.
As a supporter of the campaign, I could use an imperfect analogy, is that what if Russia had used this embassy in the States to promote about, say, like Russian art or Russian music at these times to talk about that Russia is still normal despite a war happening. As part of the Hong Kong population, I could argue as well, it's actually good to have the government support to promote our musicians in the States. For example, like having them over to have some jazz concerts to feature the culture that we have in Hong Kong. Also, a lot of films that I personally would love to see in the States, because we don't get to see all the Hong Kong produced films. They would have the opportunity to be shown in the States, screened in the States because of the support from HKETO. And if we're just countering the HKETO's very existence, these would all go away as well. I understand that this is also part of what the 2019 攬炒means, but then whether this is necessary, or are we also putting off the Hong Kong culture that we could feature in the States?
I also want to note that this is an argument among our grassroots community that when the campaign came out, there are some other counter voices in our community that have been giving out comments about this campaign. And so I think it would be a good opportunity for you to tell us a bit about how you would respond to that.
I think it's a legitimately complex issue, and it's something that would be useful to hear more people living in Hong Kong, what they think about it. And there's always this question of, in these cases where you have these renegade regimes, how do you make sure you do whatever you can to stand up to them while not hurting the people that they're oppressing? But with the HKETO, I guess my immediate answer is one of the main things the HKETO has done in the United States up to now is to sponsor film festivals. And in fact, this one that we've been targeting at the Smithsonian Museum, the National Museum of Asian Art, they've been doing that for 27 years. Up until 2019, maybe there was some justification for that. But I want American society to know that the Hong Kong government that maybe they got used to doing business with for all those years is not the same Hong Kong government as now. I mean, the Hong Kong government has never been a government of the Hong Kong people. It's never been elected by the Hong Kong people. It's more oppressive than it's ever been now. So here you have this Hong Kong government entity supposedly promoting Hong Kong culture here through sponsoring films while they're censoring films back in Hong Kong. And I'm like, wait a minute, that's hypocrisy. There's a contradiction here. I personally think that nobody should be doing any business with the Hong Kong government, especially foreigners. I want the rest of the world to see the Hong Kong government as an illegitimate government. It's an oppressive regime. And the Hong Kong Economic and Trade Office is its embassy. Hong Kong has one of the most rapidly deteriorating human rights situations in the world. It's a society in crisis. And you can't have that going on while at the same time just having business as usual with the regime that's doing that. And so I want to sound the alarm. I want to say, okay, maybe for 25 years it was fine for you to do a film festival with the Hong Kong government. Given the situation in Hong Kong over the last couple of years, it's not business as usual is not okay.
Brian and I actually went to the Smithsonian Hong Kong Film Festival and protest in front of their screen. The Smithsonian Museum also hosted the Jesse Night. During that performance, Marco Rubio tweeted about this and call out the Smithsonian Museum for hosting the performance for the HKETO. He expresses that federal buildings like the Smithsonian should never be used to legitimize the CCP's agenda.
Actually, Marco Rubio is the way I found out about that. So, one of the things we've done is we've set up an HKETO Watch Telegram group. Hong Kongers across the U.S. are monitoring HKETO and its activities. But the interesting thing is that HKETO is not always very open about its activities. So there's something happening in my own city and I don't even know what's going on. So somebody says, oh, Marco Rubio's tweeting about this. And I thought, what's that? What's going on here? And it was just really hard to even get information about what was going on. And as it turned out, the Hong Kong government had organized this tour of Hong Kong jazz musicians who were going to go to 4 U.S. cities. As it turned out, at least in New York City and in Washington, D.C., the events were effectively closed. They were by invitation only. Why is HKETO going to all this trouble of bringing this jazz group over, organizing this tour, and then holding these quite secretive events, invitation only? Who are they inviting? Just down the street from the White House, a Smithsonian museum is renting out its gallery to a dictatorship to hold this event. And the boss of the HKETO is a guy that the U.S. government has sanctioned. So once again, I thought at the very least we need to say that this is not okay. It's not on. When we got there, to make a long story short, a couple of us decided we would try to go in. And even before we could get to the entrance, a security guard bursts through the entrance and says, "You're not allowed in." Why not? Can you explain that to me? No, you're just not allowed in. And then finally she told me that I have orders from the organizer not to let you in. We stood outside and we handed out flyers that said, please don't attend this event. And then it gave, the long explanation for why people shouldn't attend the event, that it was sponsored by the HKETO and, what the Hong Kong government is doing in Hong Kong, all the political prisoners, so on and so forth. There were all kinds of different responses. They'd invited the diplomatic community, many of whom were receptive to us and seemed sympathetic to us. They'd invited some Hong Kong people who looked business elite types who didn't seem so sympathetic to us. And that's what I mean when I say wherever HKETO goes in U.S. society, I should hope that Hong Kongers have a chance to confront them and to say what we think about them.
In general, what are people's reaction when they see you guys protesting and sending the message out?
So people were surprised, but I think they were generally receptive. They were open to hearing what we were saying to them. At that Renwick Gallery jazz concert, they were a little bit more informed, and some of them were obviously supportive of the Hong Kong government, and others were, neutral and willing to listen. So, you get a whole lot of different responses, but I've never met a single American who doesn't in one way or another support Hong Kongers. I think it's pretty clear. The American government, American society, not everyone might know about it, but of the people who know about Hong Kong, they're very supportive of Hong Kongers. And, now that the HKETO has been tasked with this bigger propaganda campaign, that's why I think it's all the more important to be there and be able to confront it and give the counter message. So, because, Hong Kong's not so much in the news these days. And that's why, I think we in the diaspora have to be ready to confront that.
You actually highlighted a great point, which is that everything that we're doing on the ground in the States, we're actually raising the attention of what's going on in Hong Kong continuously. In terms of getting American attention or support, there's one particular group that I'm curious, how should we further garner their support? For example, second generation Hong Kongers who probably get to know the Hong Kong culture through film screenings that are sponsored by the HKETO. How do you think we can keep promoting the Hong Kong culture to these people, connecting with them to garner their support towards our democracy movement while we're actually limiting their chances in terms of getting exposed to the Hong Kong culture per se?
I should say that according to my analysis, I actually don't think HKETO has done much to promote Hong Kong culture. I think if HKETO ceased to exist tomorrow, we would lose almost nothing. To the extent that you might say it has, I would argue it's promoted kind of what I would call a safe or stereotypical Hong Kong culture, i.e. the Bruce Lee film. Now, there's nothing wrong with Bruce Lee films, but people shouldn't think that Bruce Lee films are Hong Kong culture. And here's where I think the diaspora has actually done a pretty amazing job, because one of the things the diaspora has done so well over the last couple of years is put Hong Kong culture out there for people to see. And Frances could talk about this much better than I could, because she's done more than most people to make sure that people around the United States can see Hong Kong films that are being made today and that are on the cutting edge, which of course almost by necessity means on the political cutting edge, because the best cinema being produced in Hong Kong over the last couple of years is looking at these political issues that are right at the center of Hong Kong existence. And if these kinds of films aren't being shown, most of them are not being shown in these big Asian film festivals, then what does that say about the promotion of Hong Kong culture? So when we went to the National Museum of Asian Art and said, we'd like you to stop your partnership with HKETO, thing we said right after that was, and we would be happy to talk with you about how to replace that if you're interested in doing that, because within the Hong Kong diaspora, there's a lot of knowledge about that. There's a lot of expertise. There's a lot of experience. We've got a Hong Kong Film Festival in the UK. We've got Paris, in Brisbane. There's nobody doing more to promote Hong Kong culture abroad these days than the Hong Kong diaspora. So why aren't these film festivals working with us? Why are they working with the HKETO? And there are two reasons for that. The one is habit, because it's what they've done all these years. And the second is money. And HKETO is not like giving these people tons and tons of money. It's just they're used to taking it. It's easy to take. And so we need to reach out to these people and say, stop working with HKETO. And if you want consultation on presenting Hong Kong film, that's something we've got a lot of experience with. We can help you. And if what you need is money, that's something we can raise as well. Because, the Hong Kong diaspora has shown that it's interested in and committed to promoting Hong Kong culture abroad.
No matter how much HKETO has done, there are ways for us to replace them. We, the Hong Kongers, is actually organizing a film festival in the US in the future. We the Hong Kongers 喺今年10月底至12月舉行第一屆香港土炮電影節 Made in Hong Kong Film Festival， 喺3個美國城市舉行電影放映，包括緣路山旮旯、因為愛所以革命同幻愛，一共5部香港電影同短片。有關門票已經公開發售，詳情請去到 wethehongkongers.org/MIHKFF 了解更多。仲有唔好唔記得 follow 我哋 IG 同 Facebook @MIHKFF 得到最新嘅資訊。支持香港電影，支持港產片，由香港人說好真正的香港故事。Is there any other projects that your watch group is working on in order to bring up more evidence to the U.S., administrations or like the congressional level to push forward and to push against HKETO's influence and their participation in the U.S. society?
Yeah, there are a couple of things to mention here, and one is that the HKETO is probably less active in the U.S. than it is in other countries. I think it's a little bit more careful here. They had that campaign with those billboards everywhere celebrating 25 years of Communist Party rule. As far as I know, those did not appear in U.S. society. I mean, I saw them in the Toronto airport, in Australia, in Europe, but not here. One of the things that we need to do is to reach out to Hong Kong diaspora in these other countries and communicate better with them and coordinate on that. I also think we need to, keep working with people in Congress. There are lots of friends of Hong Kong in Congress. Because Smithsonian's a U.S. government institution, on the board of the Smithsonian are 6 members of Congress, so we also wrote to them. And then we wrote to about a dozen members of Congress who we know are friends of Hong Kong. As it stands, we're trying to arrange a meeting with the National Museum of Asian Art. The Smithsonian secretary has asked the museum to meet with us. We're hoping to do that soon. The other thing I should mention is that, right now the Hong Kong government has just said that it's going to give away 500,000 tickets to people to go to Hong Kong. And on November 2nd, the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, which of course is an agency of the Hong Kong government, is organizing this finance summit in Hong Kong. Many of the top financial institutions in the world, including quite a few from the U.S., and they're going to be there with John Lee, the guy who's sanctioned by the U.S. government. And I think that's an important issue for Hong Kongers and the diaspora to work on, that you have these leaders of the top financial institutions in the world sharing a stage with this guy who's sanctioned by the U.S. government. Should we tell these foreign corporations, if you're going to be in Hong Kong, you must realize there are risks. There are risks that you are going to collude with this regime. And so you have to be aware of that. And if you're going to operate there, you have to do so in such a way that you're not colluding with the regime, that you're not doing things like HSBC and Standard Chartered did, where they actually came out and express support for the national security law. Or you're not doing things like the big 4 accounting firms did, where when John Lee was appointed by the Communist Party, they took out ads in Wenweibo and Dagongbao congratulating John Lee. That kind of stuff just isn't on. So I think at the very least, we need to be clear about what is bad corporate behavior in Hong Kong, and people in the diaspora have to be ready to make noise when that kind of corporate behavior occurs.
I think that's perfect. I think a good lesson here from the HKETO campaign and what the Hong Kong diaspora can do while the communist Hong Kong really is trying to tell the Hong Kong story well. That's what they're trying to do currently, is that we actually have to feature our version of Hong Kong and what's going on in Hong Kong currently, as well as what has happened over the past 25 years under the communist regime. One thing that us as a diaspora, moving onwards, while people in Hong Kong are limited in what they can voice out, this this is actually our duty.
Yeah, definitely. I agree 100% because we're in a position to speak out in ways that people in Hong Kong are not or, can only do at risk.
So to wrap this up, Brian, I know that a lot of our audience are actually in Hong Kong. Would you like to take this opportunity to say some words to them?
I just want people in Hong Kong to know that we're with them and we're always with them. And we're going to keep fighting. And the future may seem very bleak. Everyone needs to stand by their values. Everyone has to keep believing in themselves and all of the others that we've fought together with through all these years, and especially since 2019. This is a long struggle. I think that we will eventually make progress towards that. It's worth fighting for. There are just so many little things people can do in so many ways wherever they happen to be. And now that I'm outside of Hong Kong, it's not for me to tell Hong Kong people what those ways are. I'm sure Hong Kong people in Hong Kong can figure them out, much better than I can. And they understand the situation there much better than I do because they're living with it every day. Being a Hong Konger is a very special thing. And I think we Hong Kong people have really discovered that more than ever in the last few years. And we have to remember how special that is and how much it's worth fighting for.
I miss Hong Kong when I was a secondary school student and we would go down the hill to get lunch during lunchtime. It's me and my classmates going down the hill because our school is on a hill. We'll get my favorite drink, Dong Ling Cha, and one of my favorite lunch, which is Hainan chicken rice. And then we will always try to make it back to the school before our lunch rehearsal begins. We were like members of, say, choir or orchestra. And our lunch actually starts at 12:35 and our rehearsal starts at 1. So we actually have 25 minutes to jog down the hill and then rush back to the rehearsal while also getting our lunch between this 25 minutes gap. So this is a time in life that I actually miss a lot while being in Hong Kong.
I'm Frances. I really missed a time when I was in Hong Kong and writing and meeting people as student journalist. And I actually started doing journalism pretty much same time as I started my activism in Hong Kong in secondary school Form 4. I remember going around and taking pictures of Hong Kong and then interviewing people and doing in-depth story. And most of them pretty much on a very soft side and trying to find what's special about them and writing their personal stories. It's just an interesting and a fun way for me to stay connected with the community and the neighborhood. I lived in New Territories East. A lot of my reportings cover the people around that neighborhood, and it really helps me to stay grounded. I started to look back to all these old pictures and articles that I've done.
Yeah, you guys are really making me nostalgic. I lived on Llama Island. It's a very beautiful place, and I like to run. So I had all these routes I would run on the island, and it's all on these dirt paths, and there you really get to see Hong Kong nature, So during the summer, you have to bring a stick with you and wave it in front of you because, there are these spiders that are as big as your hand that are building webs between the trees along the path, and you have to hit them out of the way. One time I came across a python that was 2 meters long, just all this sort of stuff, wild boar. And one of my favorite places to run to is a place called Bakoksan, which, as the name suggests, is on the north part of the island. And then when you get to the top, there's just this most amazing view looking out over the South Llama Channel towards Hong Kong Island. Didn't matter how many times I ran that route, I would always be so amazed when I got to the top of Bakoksan and just thought about, wow, what a beautiful place this is. That's something I miss a lot. You know, one of the things that really confused me when I first moved to Hong Kong is like, people don't talk. People don't talk to each other. If they talk, it's like about food or whatever. It's like, I realized after a while that you can know people in Hong Kong for years and realize that you've never really had any serious conversation with them. It's just the strangest thing. I didn't get that, and for a while it annoyed me, and I found people in Hong Kong to be quite difficult to get to know or quite inscrutable or something like that. It was during the protests, and of course that feeling between people was just so intense, really strong feeling of solidarity with everybody and everybody working for the same cause. I mean, it's the sort of experience that if you haven't been through, it's just so hard to convey to other people how special it is that you can feel so close to so many people, including people you don't really know. But I think for many of us, that's just so deep in our hearts now, and it's just so special and so worth cherishing.
喺我哋所謂咩國際線嘅群體入邊，佢係一個幾特別嘅存在咯。大家如果見過佢真人都知道佢完全唔係香港樣啦，佢係一個白人啦咁樣，咁佢都淨係識好少嘅廣東話咁樣啦。但係佢咧又 without looking at the face， 其實佢係 even 比好多香港人更加香港人嘅香港人咯。即係你 feel 到佢嗰種情懷啊，或者佢睇得出香港人嗰種 connection 咧，其實係好難得，同埋唔係個個感受得到，同大家係 on the same page 咁樣咯。even 佢嚟到外國依然係比起我哋更加 care 香港嘅嘢啦，將所有嘢都跟得好貼。即係呢個就係點解我覺得佢都係一個幾難得嘅存在咯。
係啊，有時我哋香港人好中意即係憑膚色去問我哋使唔使轉英文台啊，或者咩時候咁，無論 Brian 啊或者Samuel Beckett 啊或者好多其實有參與呢個運動到而家仲好努力嘅一啲外籍嘅香港人啊，我會咁講。我哋有時喺一啲 Telegram group， 我哋係用中文溝通噶嘛，而其實佢哋係會即係好努力，佢每一個 message 都用 Google Translate 去睇翻嘅時候。其實佢比好多即係由細到大喺呢邊大，但係仍然揸住香港身份證就話自己係香港人嘅黃皮膚嘅人，其實佢哋更加香港人咯。佢又有其他可能美國人嘅嗰個思想，佢喺呢場運動入邊，其實佢係都可以 bring in 一啲幾唔同嘅角度。喺香港經貿辦呢個 campaign 咁啦，咁其實就係有香港政府嘅呢啲活動去，即係睇到香港嘅戲咁，即係舉例啦，好似緣路山旮旯呢啲係真係因為有佢嘅支持先嚟睇到噶嘛。係咁，我哋係咪唔應該 go against 咧？咁但係 Brian 個 point 就係在於 ，at least 我哋亦都要令到我哋嘅聲音被聽到咯。而呢樣嘢係我覺得可能一個香港即係文化長大背景嘅我哋係好容易會忽略咗一樣嘢。我覺得呢集喺呢方面聽到 Brian 嘅一啲思維啊，其實我真係覺得喺呢個學咗好多嘢。係，其實我同 Never 喺做呢個節目之前都有好多對於呢個 campaign 嘅一啲疑惑啊，或者一啲質疑啊。譬如話即係啱啱其實 Brian 有講到話HKETO 其實唔係真係做咗好多嘢㗎咋咁樣，我又不可苟同喎，因為咧我覺得佢存在基本上就係幫助呢啲喺海外香港人一直 connect to 香港嘅一啲update 或者 culture。其實我唔會去discredit 佢哋喺呢一方面嘅即係嘅力度啦，即係佢哋嘅付出啦，因為佢係有佢嘅價值。但係我都好認同 Brian 提出嗰個點，就係話當美國政府即係 governmental 嘅 department entity 係同佢哋合作嘅時候，其實係 speaking out of 另一種 statement， 就係佢哋會同香港政府合作。即係雖然佢哋表面上係不斷做好多文化嘅輸出嘅嘢啦，咁但係其實佢哋響暗碼底，其實佢哋都依然係有去幫香港政府做嘢㗎咯。即係我哋喺香港經貿辦呢個 campaign 裏面，其中一樣嘢就係可能我哋承接咗2019年嘅一個精神，就係拆大台啦。我哋以前可能好依靠呢啲官方機構去幫我哋說香港嘅故事，但係其實去到呢個時刻， 其實香港嘅故事係由我哋每一個喺美國或者係全世界嘅香港人去講翻我哋香港嘅故事，有咩喺香港發生緊，而係即係尤其是喺一個後國安法嘅年代，就係我哋每一個人都代表緊香港咯。
有少煩啦，要 emphasize 呢樣嘢，但係真啊，即係真正嘅香港故事係由翻香港人去講。
哇！呢個 tag 正，就咁啦。我係 Never，
我係 Frances。
Hi Brian。
你哋聽緊嘅係香港人盡做啦，我哋下次再見啦，
拜拜。
拜拜。